Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm so excited to be here. I know it's been a long time since I've actually done one of these writing videos. Just time has been busy, things have happened, but I'm here now. Woohoo! Okay, so today I want to talk about backstory. So what is up with backstory? Do we really need it? Because after all, it's not going to actually end up in the novel, right? So actually, it is. It is going to end up in the novel, but it's not going to end up in the novel the way that most people think it will. Okay, so backstory is crucial to your novel, and this is why. Because backstory is actually what gives your character the motivation to do what they're doing. So whether it's a villain or a main character or a side character, if they play any major role in the book, then they should have their own separate backstories. They should have something in their past that happened that motivates them, that helps them to make their decisions that they need to make, that uh, helps them treat people the way they treat them, um, and how they even view themselves. So the past or a backstory affects the way that your characters move through obstacles and complications in your novel. And without it, your characters will be one-dimensional and flat. And I honestly have to tell you that when I'm reading a book and I don't like a character, it's usually because they're boring. There's nothing, unless you're deliberately making them boring so that later on in the book they can become, you can see that they're boring changes them or something. But without that backstory, there's no flavor. They're all just the same character doing the same things. And so, um, yeah, backstory is crucial. And then another benefit of having a backstory or a past is that sometimes your backstory, while you're fleshing out their past and you're deciding, okay, what tragedy or what event happened in their life, that makes them the way they are now. Um, Sometimes that'll reveal a secret flaw or a fatal flaw or something in their character that um, will affect their attitudes and actions in the story so much that it's life changing when something comes up to mess with that flaw. And so um, these this will often create such an emotional punch that it'll give the MC a choice, or the main character a choice. Um, well, not just the main character. I mean, anybody in your story that has a backstory, this fatal flaw or this emotional need will give them a choice whether they want to abandon the flaw for some higher purpose, which is their need, or they want to continue with what they're doing and lose whatever is at stake, which is their goal. So backstory is important. It's not going to be in there willy-nilly. You're not going to just dump big things of info in there. So you have to be careful with your backstory. You have to be careful with how much you include and where you include it. You don't want to just dump big, huge sections of backstory in big blobs throughout your novel, because then your novel will become boring, it'll become stale, it'll read like a thesaurus instead of a novel. So you want to sprinkle it in. Think of it like you're making, I don't know, bread. You want to sprinkle it in, mix it in carefully, the yeast. You want to put it in where it makes sense, where it flows with the scenes, dialogue, or actions. Come up with scenes, dialogues, and actions that will actually showcase the backstory, that will give hints to the the reader about what happened in their past, and they're like, oh, okay, that's why they did what they did 2 chapters ago, because this happened. So you want to drop it in little bunches all throughout your story. So I'm gonna say, for example, let's look at Tangled. And I know I've said Tangled before, but happens to be one of my favorite movies. So in Tangled, we meet the character of Flynn Rider, and he's carefree, he's confident, he's a thief, all these things. He's just bold and daring, and that's who he is. But there are 2 distinct instances where we learn about his backstory, and they were so expertly done. So the first is, they're in the cave. Rapunzel and Flynn are in the cave, and they're getting ready to drown. And he says, "Hey, my name is Eugene." And so then, so that's all it is. It's like and then, so that kind of leaves you with questions. Why is his name Eugene? Why did he change his name? What's up with that? What happened in his past that made him come to this moment where he can feel vulnerable enough or open enough to tell her? And so then the second one, see, that first scene sets up the next one. And so then when they're out of danger, they're on the bank and they're talking. Rapunzel pushes him for more information, and it's then that we find out that he was an orphan, grew up in an orphanage. And so now we understand why he acts the way he does, because he wanted to make a name for himself. He wanted to be important. He wanted to have somebody care about him, and so all of that, and it's not an over, it's not even a lot of dialogue that they put in there to give him his backstory. They just give enough to tug at our heartstrings and make us feel for him. And then we understand, aha, this is why Flynn Rider lives the way he does. And so I love how they've woven that in there. It's a perfect backstory addition that gives him the motivation for how he's been living his life. And so that's what we need to do in our novels when we're writing them. We need to expertly weave in just enough of the backstory or the past that will give the readers those little aha moments, those things that, okay, now I know why the villain is doing this, or now I know why the character refuses to do this, or I know why the side character betrayed the main character because of what happened in their past. And so, so you want to be careful with it. You don't want to overdo it, but you do want to have it there for you to fuel your writing. I know for me, if I don't have a backstory thought of for the character, if there's nothing in their past that triggered where they are now, it's boring for me to write. And so if it's boring for me to write, I can imagine how boring the story will be for those who actually have to read it. And so knowing their backstory as a writer really helps me to flesh them out, helps me to give them character shots, emotional needs, things like that. It determines how they react in certain situations, and it gives each character in the book their own flavor, their own unique way of dealing with things. And so coming up with backstory. So how do you create a backstory? It's really up to the author how much they want to get into it. I know some people just write down a few sentences or a short paragraph. Some people do massive 4 or 5 page long outlines. They like a lot of detail. Some people write several paragraphs. Some people, use a timeline. So it's really up to you as a writer how much you want to spend with their backstory. For me, I usually write it one page, a couple of paragraphs in a story fashion. It's not something that I put a lot of detail in. I just hit the main points and then go from there, because that's all I need. But there's other people who put a lot of time and effort into their backstories. And even though the majority of it is not going to actually be in there, it's still great to do, because for them, that helps them develop the character better. I hope that made sense. And so I am going to say that more so for your villain, I think backstory is more critical for your villain, because there's always a reason why the villain is doing what they're doing. And generally, the main character is reacting off of something the villain does. And so even if you don't do a backstory for anybody else, I would definitely do one for your villain, because you need to know why they're doing what they're doing. You need to know their motivations. And so the only way to do that is to know what happened in their past that made them the way they are today. And so I think that's just about it for the backstory. What do you think? Do you agree with my opinion? Don't agree? Whatever, drop me a chat. And I will talk to you next week. Bye.